Jazakallah khair for inviting me here in Atlanta. I have family members who I love, and I have a lot of friends now that I'm getting and meeting. And so it is truly an honor to be amongst you today. One of the things that started this journey for me was I was born and raised here in the US. My parents are immigrants. And when I was growing up, I saw a lot of different things, right? As anybody who's growing up here knows and sees. And, grew up in the middle of cornfields of Ohio. Not too many Muslims, not too many brown people at all. And doing that was challenging for my parents, right? They didn't know what to do, they didn't know how to do it, and they were just winging it. And so when I kind of came to the point of realizing all the different issues and challenges facing our community, like the brother said, I've been in the community for a long time. I actually started working with young people as a young person in our youth group. And from there, I got involved with MINA, got involved with MSA National, then got involved with MAS, and continued to work with MAS, as well as FYI. And in that process, you get exposure not only to what's going on locally, but also what's going on nationally in the communities. And so I thought, okay, I'm seeing these issues kind of going on with young people and families. Maybe there's this gap that needs to be filled. And so I went ahead, got my PhD in clinical psychology, did research on Muslim youth, continued working within the community. And then, obviously I got married, and it was time for me to have kids. And I'm thinking, okay, I got this. I'm gonna be fine because I've got the field experience, I've got the research, I'm a psychologist, I have to, I do therapy, so I'm always on top of things. I got this. I was gonna be patient, loving, I was gonna be creative and, present and engaged with my kids all the time, right? 'Cause I have a background in infant mental health, my research is in Muslim youth. I got it. I wasn't gonna make the same mistakes as my parents, right? I was gonna listen, and I'm gonna do it the right way, and my kids are gonna pay attention and be so respectful, and they're gonna be the ruahids of the community. They're gonna carry the message, and I got this. How many of you had that delusion of grandeur? Right? Yeah, we all had that delusion until we had our kids. And here's what I learned. Parenting is not that formula. Nobody has it easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded us in the Quran, we will certainly test you. Each and everyone's going to be tested, right? But when we test, he's going to test us to see how do we respond to that test. How do we struggle? And that's going to tell us about ourselves more than anything. Parenting is a character building experience. I say this day in and day out. Because how we deal with the tests of our children, how we react or don't react, how we struggle with our own, trauma and history, as the brother mentioned earlier. How do we kind of get beyond our triggers? All of that is more about us than our kids, right? Yes, we do our parenting job. Yes, we know we're going to get tested. Yes, we know all of that, but how do we respond to this challenge, right? That's the thing that we need to think about, because yes, we're responsible for our kids, but we're also responsible for our actions and how we deal with our kids, right? And so what I want to do today is, one, recognize and share with all of us that we have this task. We have this task, it's an amana, it's a responsibility. How are we going to do this, right? And parenting isn't about perfection, it's progress. We put in the effort, and whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires, it thinks it's best for us, that outcome is in his hand. But we need to put in the effort. And so for us to be able to put in the effort, we need to start understanding and knowing what is the landscape, what are the realities. And we use this with data. We need to know not what's going on in the general community. That's helpful, and that's important, and that's relevant. But we also need to know what's going on within our Muslim community. And not just within our Muslim community, within the subgroups of our Muslim communities, right? Because everyone's reality is not the same. And what are we doing collectively to help improve our situation, right? And so first we need to be honest and recognize our realities, because you can't fix what you can't face, right? And then what I hope to do is share kind of a framework about how to raise resilient youth. Because realize you can't take a cookie cutter approach to tarbiyah. Everybody's family realities are different. Everybody's children are different. Everyone's support system, it's all different. And so you need to understand what works best for your reality and use that framework to guide you. And so then we now need to start thinking about, okay, we have this reality, we have this framework, but then also where are the tools to help us address these issues? And that's the next thing I want to try to be able to provide you. And as we think about all this, recognize that I too am a parent, right? I'm struggling just as much as you are. And despite all my struggles and your struggles, we can get through this together, right? We have the data and we have the du'as. And those are the two important things that we need on this parenting journey. So let's start off with kind of the topic of understanding our reality, right? So and I'm going to be using a lot of kind of real examples that have happened over the course of my work in the community. And if this is resembling anybody in your community, I am not talking about anybody in your community. I'm not ratting anyone out. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, none of that stuff, right? I'm just sharing what's been going on, what I've been working with, what I've seen in other communities. So any resemblances to anybody in your community, please recognize it's not about anyone. Sometimes people fall off, right? We had one of the leading MSA presidents on the national scene, used to be one of the main organizers in a particular region. A few years later, we find out he left Islam, right? And at first I was like, okay, maybe it's just one person, right? And then you hear about more and more and more young people leaving Islam. And so recently some research came out from Pew that said 1 in 4 young Muslims in America are leaving Islam. Yes, it's 25%, but I do not want my children in that 25%. Nor do I think any of you want that either, right? And so recognize that these numbers are not just numbers, they're our kids, our nieces and nephews, our community kids, right? And so yes, our children are an amana, and they're a sacred trust from Allah that we are responsible for shepherding. But we cannot continue to be nurturing them and developing them haphazardly. We need research. We need to know what's going on. And so the world is full of all of these challenges. We need to use everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to both our faith, our kind of our professional skills, knowledge, everything to help guide our children. And so that's one of the reasons why I did my PhD in clinical psychology, wanting to specialize in young people and dedicate my career to understanding young people and how to make them thrive. So about 19 years ago, as was mentioned, I founded the Family Youth Institute. It's a national research and education institute dedicated to Muslim mental health and family wellness, right? And so why? Because our kids, our families, our communities deserve the best that we can possibly deliver, not just guesswork, right? And so what we do at the FYI is we combine faith research, and practical tools to help us thrive as a community. And so the simple job that we have, our mission, is to empower you and your families to build stronger communities. And so as we move ahead on this parenting journey, we need to have the latest research, the latest clinical evidence to be able to effectively shepherd our children. And this is kind of the process where we identify the issues through your support, your connections, and you telling us what you're seeing. We do the research, try to find the solutions. And as you try to find the solutions, we want to get you resources to help guide you in the process, right? And then you try it out and you let us know how it is. And so kind of starting off with that, what are the issues, right? Now, before we kind of get into that, I want to kind of give you two different scenarios. And imagine that this is your child, or your niece or nephew if you don't have kids, right? First child, let's call her Ruqayya, right? She's curious and inquisitive and, always connecting and, the life of the party in her elementary years, right? And as she starts entering her teenage years, trouble starts brewing, right? She starts to act out, her grades start slipping, she becomes very argumentative, and it's becoming very difficult for her parents, and they don't know what to do, right? So that's Ruqayya, and we'll be following Ruqayya throughout today's session, right? And then there's Malik, right? Malik is a young teen, maybe 13, 14 years old, recently got a phone, and, he and his friends, initially used to hang out, play and everything, but then over the years, over kind of some time, what his parents start noticing is that he's starting to withdraw. He's very quiet, spending more time on the phone than with his friends. He's increasingly becoming irritable. He's very protective of his phone. And again, parents are confused. Like, okay, what's going on? Is this kind of typical adolescent stuff? Should I be worried? Should I not be worried? Right? So one of the first things you want to start thinking about as parents is, okay, what are the different factors, issues that can be impacting my child? Right? And so these are some of the major factors that we'll talk about. I won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll do the best that I can. I'll at least try to get to 3, inshallah. So family, friends, community, school, society, and the digital world, right? And so it's important for us to understand that all of these factors are impacting our kids. We need to figure out how. And it could be directly or indirectly, right? Either they're directly impacted or someone they know are impacted, so that they're the secondary impact, right? And so as we go through this process with both Ruqayya and Malik, let's see what happens. So let's start off with Ruqayya, right? In this teenage year, she's acting out and all that. Well, we know family could be a factor, right? And so what we find out that Ruqayya's parents are super stressed. They have intense work responsibilities. They're caring for elderly parents. They have a lot of community responsibilities. They're just juggling so many different things. And so because of that, they're just simply trying to keep their life together. Life has become extremely overwhelming for them, right? And so unintentionally, because of the level of stress, the home becomes very tense. Everyone's on edge, kind of like barking orders, or this is happening, that's happening, right? And so because everyone's irritable, stressed out, they don't have time together as a family, and that connection gets weakened, right? With the husband and spouse, and then with the kids. And so we know these challenges aren't unique. 1 in every 2 couples have at least one major issue in their marriage. And 1 in 3 couples end up getting a divorce because they're so major that they can't address it. And so these stressors don't just impact the spouses, but also shapes the environment that the children are growing up in. So what happens, what's going on with Ruqayya, right? So Ruqayya, instead of turning to her parents, because she's saying her parents are stressed out, they don't have time. And even though they want to, that connection's been weakened, right? So she doesn't turn to her parents for guidance. She looks elsewhere for attention and love and that deeper connection. And without that strong family foundation, it becomes harder to make those good, safe choices. So one of the things that we know from a research study that we're just finishing up, but when looking at Muslim youth struggles, is that whether we realize it or not as parents are actually the primary influence on young people's moral development, more than anyone else. We have the power to make a difference with our kids, but the primary vehicle is our connection with our kids. And particular for mothers, again, this research, we're in the process of writing it up as we speak. We just got it presented in our team about 2 weeks ago. So it's that fresh. Right? Mothers' warmth in how we talk and communicate is one of the number one factors that promotes moral development. Fathers' willingness to guide and helping young people kind of know how to make mistakes, guiding them in those opportunities, talking them through the process, giving them space to grow as opposed to dictate and being dictators. That is what promotes development, right? And so we're starting to parse out and understand what are the deeper factors that contribute to moral development. And so what we find is that, one, we as parents do have major impact and power to influence our children's tarbiyah, right? But at the same time, we are also potentially causing risks to our kids, right? So one, when, for example, if we are struggling with mental health issues and are not getting help, if we have marital conflict issues and challenges that we're not addressing, right? If we're not involved in our kids, it's not just the moms that need to be involved. The father-daughter relationship is crucial. We don't realize how important dads are to their daughter's development. If they feel loved by their dads, they don't need to look at any guy, and any guy who tries to come and whisk them off, they're not going to give them the time of day because they have that connection from their dad. They have that feelings of love and attention, right? And so recognize, again, this makes a difference. And so if we're not involved and we have weakened connections, then it's going to impact our children's development. And so two things that we need to realize is, one, is that protect the impact that we can have. But also, we want to look at the seerah, because yes, we're using different examples for us to think about and look at. And so, again, the Prophet ﷺ has reminded us, the best of you are the ones who are best to their families. So the question is, are we best to our families? Because when we are best to our families, our children have a better outcome. Right? So again, everybody's marriage situation is different. If you are struggling, if you have issues and challenges, we have a lot of resources available on our website. They're research-backed, clinical-based, videos, workshops, everything from communication skills, conflicts, in-laws, all of that. And resources for divorce, remarriage as well. We also, if you do need therapy, we do not provide therapy, we only do research and education, but in the state of Georgia, there is an organization called Muslim Association for Psychologists. Google them. In that you can look at, see who's available and see what you can try. But we do have resources of trying to figure out, is this the right person for you? Because it's an art and a science. And so you want to figure out what you want to do if you're a problem. Now, the other thing, while we know that family is extremely important, we also need to recognize that children are also influenced by the people they spend the most time with, right? And most often, it is their peers, right? The Prophet ﷺ reminded us, a man follows the religion of his close friends. So each of you should be careful about whom he takes as a close friend. And so, who are our kids hanging out with, right? That makes a difference. You know, I forgot to talk about Ruqayya, actually. Let me go back to Ruqayya. So I'll just tell you about Ruqayya. So Ruqayya, I was telling you earlier about the family, right, situation. Well, so she started going to her friends and being influenced by them, and they were egging her on to go out with guys, do things late at night when her parents had gone to sleep, you know, chatting and texting. She did it, but she was also influenced by her friends. So one, right, there is a negative part, right? Negative part of bringing you down. But peers can also build you back up, right? So one of the things is recognizing that positive peer groups, they help, if you're able to develop a sense of belonging with a positive group, and they're able to help talk about Islam and teach Islam with each other. Peers, when it comes to religious messaging, have greater impact than parents. Now it sounds a little different, right? I just said, well, parents have the most, yeah, parents have the most influence when you talk about communication and developing that anchor. But talking about Islam, that is strongest most with young people, right? That's why when you're having a youth halaqah program, or organizations like MINA and Masjid and YM, all of these organizations, the reason why they're effective is because it's young people telling young people and inspiring them to become more practicing Muslim, right? I think back from my own time, right? For me, craziest thing in the world, I was forced going to the lectures at the different conferences. My mom would go in, she'd sit in the back, and then one by one, each one of us would leave without her noticing because she was so enthralled in the talk. We had no interest, right? But one of those times, I was at a youth conference, it was Mina, and the speaker talked about his struggles maintaining his wudu because he was trying all the different techniques how he tried to keep his wudu together, right? Mundane as possible. But the realism in that and that struggle, that perked my curiosity. Like, oh, okay, these guys are, normal people, right? And it's these things, and then he went on to continue talking about the importance of the deen, owning the deen, and really, what are the things that you need to do? But that's the spark that we need for our young people, other young people telling us, right? And so growing up, what are the influences that you have for your young people? I had my cousins, I had Mass, I had MENA, I had all these organizations, and there was this smaller groups of us getting together on a regular basis, learning our deen, going through life's challenges, and that's what helped me. Do we have something like that in our communities? Again, some things you can't control when it comes to peer influence. Some of us are in situations where, one, because of family, because of marriage situation, we don't have full control of what we can or cannot do with the peers that our kids are interacting. It's okay. Do the best that you can. Control what you can, and leave the rest up to Allah, right? But again, the takeaway is powerful. If we're able to cultivate positive peers, then we're again increasing the likelihood of our young people becoming more Islamically oriented. How are we doing on time? So just so you know, because I still have a lot, but I also want to be respectful to the other speaker.
We can go a little bit longer, inshallah. We'll just delay Isha a little bit. I want us to be able to get through what we need to get through, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah.
I already told him you can take all my time. I just texted him.
Okay.
We'd rather benefit from you. Everybody knows me here. It's all right. So I mean, this is very important. So.
Okay, Jazakallah. You know, we've talked about parents, we've talked about peers, but there's another influence that is impacting our kids on a daily basis, and that's technology. You have to recognize that. Our youth are digital natives. They're spending countless hours, days online. What they see, share, and consume, all that online, that impacts their self-image. It impacts their relationship with, it impacts their faith, right? And there are real risks. You know, this data that I'm showing you about the percentage, again, this is data that we looked at with, in collaboration with young Muslims. And what we did is we looked at the pornography use within the Muslim community. Now this sample size is a highly religious sample size, not your everyday Muslim, not just some people who, you know, the parents are Muslim, they're not practicing. These are our religious kids, right? And these are the rates of use of both young people, and we have data on men and women, about 30% of young girls who are also using. And so again, we're not usually thinking about our girls, but if we're now seeing the data, we need to take protective action. Usually the young girls are more into the more graphic, explicit novels, and the boys are more into the sites, right? And so recognize, okay, what are you people using? How are they using? Okay, we as parents need to know this. And there's a detailed research report, which I'll show you later on, that talks about that. But these are real lists. So that's one is the pornography, right? The other thing is also AI. And, you know, not talking about AI, ChatGPT, that type of stuff, but what's also happening, we just had an issue in our community where a young Muslim woman was upset and mad at one of the young Muslim boys and AI generated messages and sent it to the police and said, this guy is harassing me, right? And the guy was taken to jail for a while, and, you know, all this other issues and stuff happened until they were able to get forensic evidence saying, no, that she generated this with AI. And he didn't, because he had been denying. He's like, I wasn't there. I was with this person. And he's telling them, but because she was able to generate these texts, the police just listened, right? And so part of us is recognizing, making sure that our kids know how to be careful in the digital world, right? And so there is this AI risk that we need to think about as well. There is the endless scrolling and the gaming, and the brother mentioned earlier, all of this happening, right? That distracts them from their spiritual purpose, right? And even gets them to become very addicted. And so going back to the story of Malik, you know, I was talked about a little earlier, he was, you know, on the phone a lot. One of the things that we eventually found out, his parents went into his phone and looked that he was looking at websites. Right? And so, again, the parents are disappointed, upset, and they don't know what to do. Alhamdulillah, they had seen the infographics, and they told us later on, like, we looked at the infographics, and then we were able to look at the report that we had written up. And in the report, it helped them understand the whys of why was their son likely using. And what was interesting, they were able to figure out, one of the biggest things that we found out was young boys are struggling with their emotions and they don't know how to cope because we don't teach them how to cope. But if we know that's one of the major reasons, and we simply just teach them how to cope with their emotions, we can avoid this stuff, right? And so again, they said, like, you know, we looked at there's a toolkit, we looked at those kind of parenting ways to talk to your kids, all of that stuff. That's what helped them start the conversation with their son and help them speak with compassion rather than kind of the harshness and the anger that many of us tend to present with. So again, like really thinking about how the digital world is impacting our mental health, our kids' mental health, not just our kids' mental health, but also ours. But that's another factor to be aware of. And those are the negative aspects. But it's a tool. There are many positive aspects that we also need to consider, right? One of the things, if you think about the activism of what's raising awareness in Gaza, if we didn't have TikTok, if we didn't have the Reels, if we didn't have Instagram, we wouldn't have been able to advocate. And so it is a tool that can be used positively. There's so many different lectures, so much information available online. Again, if young people are sharing those with each other, that's also very positive. So it's a lot of it is making sure that, you know, when we have our resources, that we are developmentally appropriate. And so the toolkit that we have has that information of, okay, how do you make things developmentally appropriate? How do you set rules and consequences, monitoring usage? We're not our kids' best friends. That's not our job. Our job is to mentor them through this process and as much as possible, improve their relationship to Allah. If we do that, we're successful, right? You do it nicely, with compassion and connection, but sometimes what's going to happen is kids are going to be like, no, you can't look at my phone. I paid the bill. I bought the phone. I very much can. We as parents sometimes get bullied by our kids, and we need to be firm. Sometimes, okay, many times. The reality, it was real parenting, right? So, but we need to have the confidence to be able to do that. But when you have information that's guided and based on research as well as our deen, you have that confidence to be able to do that. Okay, so going back to, we talked a lot about Ruqayya, right? Now let's talk a little bit about Malik, right? He was the one who saw the information and was looking at appropriate sites, right? So one of the things that the parents realized as they went through the information and the resources, they realized that it wasn't just him. His friends were also doing it. They're the ones who told him about the sites. And that's what actually started that. And so now all of his friend group are using these sites and looking at it. So they realize, okay, it's not just him, it's a community issue. What do we need to do for that? So again, we have workshop, we invited us to do a workshop, the digital parenting workshop. We used a toolkit. We talked about pornography and what are the things, when do young people use, how do they use, what are the things that you can do to prevent, all of that, right? But because of that, the parent group that attended, they actually came together and they're like, okay, we're gonna install the same rules for all of our kids. So now Manik can't be like, you're the only parent who does this, we all heard this. Anybody's got teenagers have heard this, right? You're so extra, yeah, right? But now all 10 parents, 10 friends' parents are all having the same rule, no matter whose house you go to, it's the same thing. That's the impact of community. That's what the masjids can be doing, right? And so going from being overwhelmed and isolated to now they have a community of parents who are helping these young people gather and kind of have similar rules to kind of keep them on the path, right? That's powerful, right? What we see is communities can shape young people, right? They can help us help shepherd young people, even if they make mistakes. Guide them. Many of us are familiar with the hadith of the young companion who went up to the Prophet ﷺ in the masjid and asked permission to commit zina. Now, which person is ever going to do this here? Ain't no one going to do that, right? But what does that tell you about the community and the safety that the Prophet ﷺ had created? And what does the Prophet do? The companions are like, oh my God, I can't believe he says, let him be. He called the young man up to the front, had him sit in front of him. The Prophet ﷺ sat in front so that he is touching. So there is that physical connection. There is that emotional connection. And then he asks the young man, would you like this for your mother? Would you like this, for your sister? Would you like this? And it goes on and on and on, right? What's he doing? After the physical connection, the emotional connection, then it's the intellectual, right? And he goes through that with him. And at the end of that, he makes dua for him. But think of the compassion and the way he's saying this. Safe environment. He eventually is like, I never do this in my life. The thought even no longer crossed my mind. But that's the process of character development that we want to be able to do, to create those environments that young people feel comfortable enough to say, I want to do this. Can I do it? Or can you help me? Right? And so we see that, again, one from the prophetic approach, but we also, like I said earlier, told you, the impact of young people. We're finishing up a study that's called I Belong, that really looks at masjid belonging, young people's belonging in the masjid, right? And what we find is that when, like as I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges, let me see what that is. One of the things that we see, the thing that brings young people to the masjid are relationships. And the thing that drives them away from the masjid are the relationships. The cliques, the racism, the kind of the judgmental approach that we have, all of that, that's what drives them. But when people are caring and kind and generous to them, give them respect, give young people respect. We always talk about adult respect. But when we are respectful and asking young people, hey, what's going on? What are you planning on doing? Like, how can I help you out? Genuinely care about them. That increases belonging, right? Having that welcoming environment. We used to be part of one community. The kids would come home and just throw their backpacks and run to the masjid. And now we're part of another masjid, and it's like dragging them to the masjid. Same kids, but the masjid environments are totally different. And so we need to think about, what are we doing in our community to improve and get young people to want to be connected and belong to the masjid, right? And when young people feel seen, supported, and connected, they're going to want to be around the masjid and be in the masjid and participating and involved in all that, right? Religious struggle. This is another research. So we have 3 studies going on right now that are just finishing up. So this is kind of the one looking at religious struggles, right? So remember Ruqayya I talked to you about earlier? So she was, underneath it all, she was struggling with her faith. Came from a great family, Islamically oriented, talking about and internalizing kind of tarbiyah elements from the very beginning, from the time she was young. But for whatever reason, it didn't stick with her, right? She needed that pure kind of religious socialization. She was struggling with her faith, and one of the things that she had an issue with is that judgmental attitude she experienced around her, right? And she saw Muslims being hypocritical. And that just like, you guys gonna be hypocritical? Like, what is this, right? And she felt frustrated by the community because they weren't very welcoming. And that didn't seem to connect with her. And so that's why she was pushing away. It was our institutions, right? And so one of the things that our research find, again, we just putting it together right now, is finding that 64% of Muslim youth who are practicing report struggling. And the reason why I'm saying the sample is that this is the kids who are coming to our masjids. This is the kids who are coming to our Sunday schools or halaqas. They're struggling. And they don't have anyone to talk to about their struggles. We tend to, if you think about our programming, it's usually lecture based. Where is experiential learning that the brother before me was speaking about? Right? What he was talking about, it's very much along kind of what we call the positive youth development framework. But what he was outlining is research based. And when they're able to help them reflect and engage, that's what strengthens their religious development. Okay? And so that was one of the important. The other things, mentioned earlier is, how is it impacting, how is it shaping their understanding of their faith, right? Because there are all these struggles and there's questions and the hypocrisy, young people are like, are we teaching them the beauty? Are we connecting them to Allah first and knowing who Allah is before we get into the details, right? So really thinking about our approach of how we do this. Again, and I know I'm just going to try to keep it short. This is, the brother was talking about earlier, he was presenting, this is a framework, I don't know if he realizes he's using, but this is a framework that he's using. He probably does. But realizing, one, if you want to have a healthy young person, right, you need to have an enabling environment, an environment where young people feel loved, cared for, connected. But you also need to teach them skills, and they need to have opportunity to do things and develop agency. That's where the lack of motivation is. And so this is, we can do a lot more into this, but I just wanted to, because I wasn't going to present this, but because what he presented, I was like, oh, bro, he knows his stuff. This is what he's following, and this is exactly all the way he was talking about. That's what he was talking about. And then, I've mentioned this over and over again throughout the talk, right? And I just summarize it now because I know it's we're running out of time. It's too long to be to listening for this long. But what you heard me over and over again is say connection, 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 right? The previous talk I was talking about, the previous section I was talking about understanding the environment. But when we talk about tarbiyah and what needs to be done in order to make change, you need to first have the connection, right? To raise confident children, they need to feel valued by their parents. We may value them, but we may love them, but they may not feel loved. Two different things, right? And so that connection helps us. And through that connection, if we're able to display compassion and exhibit and they experience it, then and only then can we really be effectively working on their character. Right? And from there, as the brother was mentioning earlier, you give them opportunities to be competent. And through multiple times of being competent, they gain confidence. And from confidence, they then have the energy and the ability and the thinking skills to be able to contribute more effectively in their society. Not just community, but their society. Because if we're here as Muslims in America, if we're not improving our society, then why are we here? Right? And so that is, as the brother mentioned earlier, yes, we are here to serve Allah, and the way we serve Allah is serving His creation. And so this is kind of like the kind of summary of what we want to try doing. I just want to be respectful of your time. And I'll just kind of skip through this, inshallah. But if I talked a lot of this is going to come out in a paper, I think in the next few months, inshallah. If you're interested, you can sign up on the FYI website, and you can get the papers. Look on our website. There's many different resources on many different topics, whether it's youth related. Our 4 focus areas is mental health, youth, marriage, and parenting. And now we're starting to look into more elder care, because that is an issue that is not being addressed and needs to be addressed. So jazakallah khair, everyone, for your patience. And inshallah, during the question and answers, we can answer any questions people may have. Jazakallah khair.